Good afternoon po. It's Alas Bix Pro na naman. Magandang hapon sa lahat. We are live here via Facebook. Magandang hapon po.
Game.
Kamusta po, Mr. Chair, VP Alex? Press Reese is actually with us too.
Hinaan niya yan.
Doon kayo sa taas muna.
Diyan lang, okay lang.
Okay.
Magandang hapon mga ka-Pix Pro.
Happy Friday na.
Happy Friday, maulang Friday to us.
Yes po, tatlong bagyo ang ating kinakahanap ngayon.
And advance Merry Christmas kasi bare months na.
Officially.
Officially. All right.
Ayan. So, okay. Mapasok na si Ena. 20 plus na tayo.
Yes, very interesting tong topic natin for today. It's a different perspective from what we are usually have here during our kwentuhang cybersecurity.
And go ahead, Arlene. Sorry. Nag-mute
Yes
ako.
po. Yes po. So, batiin lang po muna natin ang ating mga viewers from Facebook, starting off with Sir Lex Carion. Isang magandang hapon sa inyo, sir.
Sir Ben Isra. Hello, ka-Pix Pro. Good afternoon po.
Good afternoon.
One of our avid viewers, Sir Harold Agomaa. Magandang hapon, Certified Capex Pro.
Sino pa?
So,
Si BPOB.
Si Afro V.
Si
Watching.
Hi, VP Ruby.
Good afternoon po. Happy Burr and First Friday, Miss Julian Loren Escarza.
One of our alumni coming from the PIXPO Certified Cybersecurity Professional
Oh,
Program.
hello.
Yes po.
And si Sir Efren Tab-Tab. Magandang hapon po sa inyo. Right now, we have over 30 plus viewers.
Isang maulan na hapon mga Capex Pro from Sir Darwin Tejerero. Magandang hapon, Sir Darwin.
Lagay niyo yung ano niyo. Location niyo.
Yeah, para ma-shout out natin kanyang location.
Bigyan ng weather update sa location niyo.
Oo. Maulan ba dyan? Maybe we should avoid speaking Tagalog. So Alan can join the conversation. Because currently, Alan, we have 2 typhoons. Well, it's not yet it's already within the, I think, within the area of responsibility of the Philippines, but it's still on the farther areas. But maybe the other, so we're asking the viewers to give updates. Oh, we
How
have
are they right
viewer
now?
from Camarines Sur.
Yes.
Good
And
afternoon.
from Zambales
Mr.
also.
Ran. Yep. I think Press Jen is also online.
Watching, yeah.
Yeah.
Press Jen, how's the weather in Bulacan right now?
So, Alan, we are being watched all over the country.
All over the country. So from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, we have viewers. All
Very
right.
remarkable. Of course, a typhoon is something that I have never experienced, you know, in my part of the
Really?
world.
Never?
We do not get that kind of weather.
I don't know if you're lucky or it's good because the rains are needed also by our farmers. It's just that too much rainfall will also result to floodings. Okay, I think Arlene,
Yeah, we can start.
you have a good number.
Yes, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you very much. Yes.
All right.
So, but like what I've mentioned a while ago, this is a very different perspective coming from the usual Fix Pro Kwentuhang Cybersecurity that we conduct every Friday. So this time around, we do have another technology partner as our guest speaker for this episode. But this is a very different perspective altogether because this one is from the perspective of a mobile company. So usually we have IT companies, cybersecurity companies coming our way as our speaker. But for this one, it's a different perspective altogether. But likewise, it doesn't really actually matter whether you're from an IT security company or coming from an SA company. Cybersecurity is for everybody. So for this Kwentuhang Cybersecurity, we are very fortunate indeed that we will be having someone from Nokia, from Bell's Lab, for our guest speaker to talk about the evolving cybersecurity trends nowadays. So who is this person, by the way? I guess Press Reese will do the better job of introducing our guest speaker.
Thank you, ED Arlene. Good afternoon, mga Kapix Pro. I would like to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, Sir Alan McBride. He's a cybersecurity lead at Bell Labs Consulting, which is part of Nokia. He is currently based in Dublin, Ireland. If I'm not mistaken, it's already 10 a.m., right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So Alan has over 30 years of experience in the communications industry, primarily in the domains of network management and cybersecurity. And with Bell Labs Consulting, he has engaged with clients globally on the topic of securing critical infrastructure, including energy and communication sectors. And the topics of focus includes security of 5G networks, cloud, and AI and ML or machine learning. Alan is a certified information systems security professional or CISSP, and he has held certified ethical hacker CEH certification. So welcome to Pix Pro, Sir Alan McBride, and yeah, go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for the introduction. Thank you. And indeed for the opportunity to speak with you today. Indeed, as mentioned, I'm based in Dublin, Ireland. Personally, I've only had one occasion to visit your wonderful country. As a consultant, we do a lot of business globally, of course, including in your region, but only once did I visit Manila some time ago. So looking forward to getting back sometime soon. If I may share my slides, please let me know when you see these. If somebody can just confirm that the slides are visible.
Yes, Alan, you can see it now.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. So what I propose to talk about is our perspective, Bell Labs Consulting perspective on security trends and best practices globally. Being with Bell Labs, and I'll say a little bit about Bell Labs in a moment, we are very much focused on the future. So really, we take a future back perspective on all aspects of transformation, but specifically on security also. Just a word indeed about Bell Labs and about Nokia. So I guess many of you will know Nokia, but some of you may know Nokia only for mobile phones. Of course, Nokia now is a networking company. Nokia makes the equipment, the software and services that enable communications networks, be they mobile networks, broadband. Indeed, Nokia is one of only a couple of companies that build networks end-to-end and holistically. All components, including radio access and core, broadband, carrier-grade routers, fiber optics, all of that. And of course, the software systems and cloud native software that go along with that. Bell Labs, however, is the research part of Nokia. It has a very storied history, actually. Bell Labs has been around for almost 1 century. Bell Labs was behind many of the inventions that all of us are familiar with. The transistor was invented at Bell Labs, as was the laser. Even the grandparent of all of the current modern operating systems like Apple OS, Android, etc., Linux, they are all derived from Unix, which was also invented at Bell Labs. So Bell Labs innovations and inventions have touched all of us. Bell Labs itself has been awarded as many as 9 Nobel Prizes in physics and chemistry. I think the first was in 1937. The most recent was in 2018. Bell Labs has also been awarded 2 Grammys and an Emmy for contributions to the entertainment industry through science. So that's Bell Labs. Bell Labs still focuses, of course, on research, and it is a major engine of patents for Nokia. It does both long-term and short-term research, but personally, I'm actually in the consulting part of Bell Labs. So in the consulting part of Bell Labs, we engage with external clients globally. Again, with a very future-oriented vision. We help our clients formulate strategies for embracing new and evolving and emerging technologies, such as, for example, cloud, such as 5G. And of course, security is a key component of digitization and transformation, not only in communications, but also in enterprise sectors and critical infrastructure sectors. A lot of our work is with critical infrastructure verticals, such as, for example, energy sector. So that's just a word about Bell Labs, Nokia, and also Bell Labs Consulting. But to the topic of the day, what I want to speak about is our perspective from working with clients globally on the evolution of security. What does the future hold for security? So the first thing to say is that there are multiple dimensions of evolution when we think about security. Of course, we will speak often about the evolution of the threat landscape itself, advanced persistent threat agents, constantly evolving ransomware, emerging and evolving threats such as supply chain threats, the use of AI/ML in attack, and on the horizon, the threat of quantum computing, which of course has the potential to break the current strong encryption algorithms in the future. So there is evolution then in the threat dimension. There is also, quite notably, globally, there is evolution in the compliance dimension as governments around the globe seek to regulate more and more. We see this, of course, in all regions, including your own. So standards, regulations, and even best practices are all evolving as well. But perhaps of more interest is the evolution of technologies. Technology itself is evolving rapidly, of course, and all of that evolving technology must be protected. So one may mention 5G, 6G, virtualization and cloud. Many dimensions of technology are evolving. Cloud native software, blockchain, of course, AI/ML, of course, augmented and virtual reality and metaverse, quantum computing, nanotechnology, etc. Multiple threads of evolution in the technology domain. Please note, though, that of course, all of these evolutions need to be protected, need to be secured, but also many of these could have a role to play in security itself, and also many of these could have a role to play in the attack dimension. So we will speak later on about AI/ML. It's a great example of something that needs to be protected. AI will itself be the target of attack. AI can also be used in attack, and AI, of course, can also be used in defense. This is actually true of many of the technology innovations that we list here today. So this is the context. So then, noting that, what is our perspective from Bell Labs Consulting on what must be done to evolve security as these multiple dimensions evolve? Well, of course, there are many things to mention, but we've selected 4 that we think are the most important to highlight. And the first recommendation is that one should adopt sound foundational security principles, which we will talk about in a moment. That is really table stakes. These principles include aspects such as, of course, defense in depth, security by design, but also more recent principles such as zero trust and assume breach. The second aspect that we want to highlight is that of enhanced risk management. Of course, most enterprises are doing risk management, but our position is we advocate enhancement of risk management procedures and approaches to cope with the rapidly evolving dimensions that we discussed. We also advocate the use of adapted cybersecurity frameworks. There are many cybersecurity frameworks out there. One could, of course, build one's own framework for the company of choice, but we advocate that cybersecurity frameworks should be adapted based on the target domain that they are addressing. We also advocate various proactive security measures. You will hear a lot about that in my subsequent slides. Rather than just wholly reactive measures, we advocate proactive measures. So these are the four areas that I would like to discuss. In the interest of time, I will have to curtail some of the coverage of the topics, of course, and I would welcome questions at any point during the presentation so that we can keep it interactive. So please do feel free to contribute your questions early, and perhaps we can discuss them during the presentation or towards the end. But moving on then, just by way of example, I want to show 5G as an evolving technology that needs to be secured. This is, of course, in the communications dimension, but 5G services will be used increasingly by enterprises, including critical infrastructure enterprises. Just for example, 5G enables a concept of network slicing. One could envisage a 5G network slice provided to, say, an energy utility company, so that they, in a sense, have a secure virtual 5G network of their own for their critical payloads and traffic, mission critical traffic. What I want to illustrate here on this slide is simply that, of course, 5G is about the radio access network and the devices that communicate with 5G radio. But end-to-end 5G is so very, very much more complex than that. It is a great example of the complexity of the ecosystem, the complexity of the supply chain that must be protected, because, of course, 5G doesn't only include the radios that the devices communicate with. There is a very complex software core to 5G, cloud native core, by the way, running on a telco cloud infrastructure. That telco cloud can be core, but also distributed to the edge. 5G also has extensive and complex operation systems to manage the network. So end to end, top to bottom, holistically, 5G as a technology is extraordinarily complex to manage and to secure. It is, however, a great example of a new technology that is secure by design. Security by design was baked into 5G by the standards at the very earliest phases of its inception. It builds, of course, on the security measures of 4G and 3G before, and it extends the security by design principle. So while also being complex and challenging to secure, 5G itself already enables a higher level of security than previous generations. I did mention the key security foundational principles that we advocate one should adopt. I'm sure this audience will be familiar with most of these, if not all of these. Security should not be an afterthought, particularly given the complexity of new developments, including cloud native. Security should be baked in at the design phase. This is also articulated by the shift left security principle, which is essentially saying that in the development life cycle, security should be addressed earlier. It should be addressed at the requirements, the architecture, and the design phase, certainly in the implementation and coding phases for software, not just after deployment by add-on measures. Defense in depth is a key principle, and I want to say more about defense in depth. Of course, it is the principle that, as you will all recognize, that security should involve multiple layers of cooperating controls. But a key point of defense in depth is that not just protective controls are required, and we'll speak about that in a moment. The zero trust principle is the topic of the day. Zero trust, of course, is a principle or a concept whereby there should be no implicit trust. It is, in essence, it's moving away from the old model where an enterprise was protected by a firewall, but once you were inside the firewall and on the enterprise LAN, you were implicitly trusted and had quite a high degree of access then to systems and applications. Zero trust essentially says that all access should be authenticated and authorized and indeed monitored, and trust should be constantly reviewed. I mentioned shift left security already. Assume breach is a critical principle as well. Assume breach says that one should always assume that security measures can be breached, and that of course feeds into the defense in depth principle. But not only that, one should always assume that one's perimeter may already have been breached. So those are the dual aspects, the two sides of the assume breach principle. So then, what is the rationale for these principles? Well, essentially it is all about disrupting the attack, the kill chain, the cybersecurity kill chain, frustrating the attacker, because again, with the assume breach principle, one must always assume that protective measures can potentially be breached. So additional measures are required to frustrate the attempts by the attacker to perform privilege escalation or elevation and to execute lateral movement. So zero trust and eliminating vulnerabilities that can be exploited through shift left security. These are measures to try to slow down and frustrate and inhibit the attacker from progressing along the kill chain. Ultimately, though, no security is perfect. There will always be residual risks. The assume breach principle says that breaches must be anticipated, and therefore we also advocate the advanced measures such as proactive threat hunting and enhanced detective controls, and maybe even deceptive techniques such as the use of honeypots to frustrate the attacker and to increase the likelihood of detecting them. Many of you will of course be familiar with studies such as the Verizon data breach report or the annual report from IBM and Ponemon, where they look at the concept of the detection deficit. The mean time to detect a breach is still running, even today, even in most recent reports, in the order of hundreds of days. And then the mean time to correct or to address a breach after detection is in tens of days. So very often breaches, the attacker is persistent in the network for of the order of a year, frankly, in many, many cases. So that emphasizes the need for better detective and responsive techniques, which is exactly what this slide here is trying to illustrate. Security controls are not just protective, such as, of course, firewalls or encryption, but also detective and responsive, as well as being other dimensions as well. You know, controls, of course, can be physical, technical, or procedural. Encryption would be an example of a technical control, of course. Access management would be an example of a procedural. And of course, controls are seeking to protect the various attributes such as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Controls also have different maturity levels. So all of this is just illustrating that when thinking about defense in depth, one must think about controls in all of these dimensions to make sure that one has adequate coverage of risk. And it is all about risk, which is the subject of the next of our points of advocacy. At Bell Labs Consulting, we do, with our clients, we always advocate enhanced risk management practices. Now, what I mean by this is, of course, most enterprises will be doing cybersecurity risk management. But in our experience, where many enterprises fall down is that the risk identification step is often, in our view, it is often overly ad hoc. It's relying too much on expertise. And of course, if a risk is not identified, then that risk cannot be properly assessed. That risk cannot be properly managed. So of course, risk identification is the crucial step of a risk assessment. Our perspective on risk assessment is that risks should be identified using a threat modeling approach. One should start with comprehensively cataloging the assets that you are trying to protect. It's essential to know what you are trying to protect and to categorize your assets in terms of criticality or sensitivity. That should inform your risk assessment. And then we advocate a structured approach for assessing risks based on first identifying what are the high-level threats. An example high-level threat would be service disruption. And these threats, this approach and these threats, of course, are applicable to any domain, not just telecommunications domain, but also, of course, IT, applicable to cloud, to AI/ML. Essentially, whatever are the assets to be protected, an approach like this can be used. Identifying the high-level threats allows you then to reason about what are the concrete attacks that could be used by the attacker to realize these high-level threats. So again, if service disruption is an example of a high-level threat, then of course, denial of service attack is an example of an attack that could realize that threat. So this is just an example of one structured approach for risk identification. But our point is risk management should be improved in the face of these multiple dimensions of evolution. The second point of advocacy is we do advocate the use of adapted cybersecurity frameworks. Our point of view is that it is important for an enterprise to have an overarching cybersecurity framework. And one of the key values of such a framework is it allows security practitioners in the enterprise to speak a common language with the business stakeholders who may not be conversant in security terms. One example framework, of course, is the CSF, the cybersecurity framework from NIST in the United States. That is perhaps the highest profile framework present today. But the point we're making here is that frameworks should be adapted. The NIST framework is a great example actually of this because it is designed to be adapted and customized. When we engage with clients to adapt frameworks with them or on their behalf, an approach we take is to source a wide range of external standards and frameworks and best practices, as well as a knowledge base of cybersecurity risks pertinent to the domain, be it telecoms, be it critical infrastructure, but also, and this links back to my previous point, also a risk assessment should be done to feed into the framework, to extend the framework with security measures that are indicated by the risk assessment. And of course, the foundational security principles that I mentioned feed into the framework as well. So that is just an illustrative overview of our perspective on why and how cybersecurity frameworks should be adapted to be most suitable for, because of course there is no one size fits all. The third point, or the last point at a high level that I wanted to emphasize was our view that security measures should be proactive. Indeed, risk assessments, as just illustrated, and that itself is a proactive measure. Assessing risk proactively before developing something or before deploying something. And then that's a key aspect of security by design in itself, because the risk assessment will indicate the required security measures that should be driven then into the development, into deployment. Shift-left security is also a proactive measure. It's addressing security more proactively in the development lifecycle. Deception techniques are a proactive measure. It's about deploying deceptive measures in your systems, in your networks, that may frustrate the attacker or incite the attacker into essentially triggering an alarm by accessing something that isn't meant to be accessed in normal operation. Threat hunting, though, is perhaps the most important proactive measure to highlight in this context. Essentially, the point is the detection deficit, as mentioned previously, and the learning that breaches are very often not discovered for hundreds of days, is an indicator that incident detection, while being important, one cannot rely 100% on detective measures. One can't only rely on alarms in a SIM system. Rather, it is important to reason about potential attacks. In alignment with the assumed breach principle, it's important to hypothesize about breaches that may have already happened, and then to proactively go hunting for evidence of those breaches having happened. Lastly, as a proactive measure, automation of security is very, very important. We are at the early stages of a roadmap, really, whereby various, indeed all aspects of security should and can be eventually automated to some degree. So if I may move forward a little bit, because again, in the interest of time, we want to get to Q&A as quickly as possible. I'll skip through some slides. I just want to go directly via this slide. I just want to quickly say, in the context of shift left security, particularly for cloud native software, the DevSecOps concept is very important and is valuable to look at. Essentially, it is addressing security early in the cloud native development lifecycle, including threat modeling, including secure coding, but perhaps most critically, by integrating automated static and dynamic security testing into the development lifecycle, into the CI/CD pipeline, and indeed onwards into deployment and operation with runtime application self-protective measures as well. But moving on then, I want to go to the topic of AI. As mentioned earlier, AI, of course, is one of those key domains of rapid technological evolution. As such, AI itself, of course, will be a target of attacks. As such, AI needs to be secured. And indeed, since AI is software which will process data and which will communicate over networks, of course, to secure AI, one needs all of the traditional measures at the highest level, software security measures, including, for example, DevSecOps, data security measures, including, of course, encryption, which eventually should be quantum safe encryption, communications security, including, again, encryption, including zero trust measures for critical infrastructures, such as, for example, the use of mutual TLS for authentication, if we get a little bit technical there. But in addition to the traditional security measures, there will need to be some AI-specific measures as well, because AI as a target will be subject to AI-specific attacks, such as adversarial attacks, which seek to compromise the results of the AI, essentially through data manipulation. An example of this, by the way, is image perturbation. So AI can be very good at processing and recognizing images, but it turns out that it is possible to perturb or to manipulate individual pixels in images at a level which are not detectable to the human eye, but which can lead the AI into entirely miscategorizing the image. So there are research examples of that. It's just one example of an adversarial attack. Other attacks are on the AI model or the training data. Model inversion seeks to attack an AI system to learn about the training data, whereas model extraction seeks to attack the AI system to learn about the model, perhaps to steal the intellectual property therein. But the key point is that all of the existing traditional security measures apply, while additionally some domain-specific measures will be required also. And again, just to loop it back to my previous point, how should these measures be chosen? They should be chosen based on a risk assessment. The AI system itself should be decomposed into assets, and ideally a threat modeling exercise should be undertaken to assess the risks and determine the required measures. But then beyond being used beyond being the target of attacks, AI, of course, is already being used in defense. Many, if not most, modern security products and systems, such as SIM systems, anti-DDoS systems, are starting to use or have been using for some time what may be called AI techniques. And this, of course, will only increase. AI will have a role to play in many aspects of security, including anti-DDoS, including analytics, but even eventually in dynamically orchestrating those deception techniques, for example, that I mentioned. One could imagine AI systems dynamically and flexibly reconfiguring honeypots and honeynets in real time to frustrate attempts by attackers to perform reconnaissance. AI can also assist with development. AI, of course, can produce code even today, but it has the prospect also of improving training and awareness and in supporting developers with secure coding. So eventually, of course, and AI will be used in attack as well. This is, of course, already happening, but it will happen more and more. So eventually, of course, the future will be that AI systems will be involved in developing AI systems, which will be subject to attack by AI systems and defended by AI systems. So AI will eventually be ubiquitous. So if I may, I'll just run to some, skip forward to some key takeaways. The message that I want to convey today, that is, in our view, security must be addressed proactively. Concrete proactive measures include risk assessments and include proactive threat hunting. Security should be based on sound security principles. And the ones I would like to highlight today include zero trust and, critically, the assume breach principle. We do advocate that enterprises should have overarching cybersecurity frameworks. Further, these frameworks should be adapted rather than just taken off the shelf. And in adapting such frameworks, one should do this based on a risk assessment. Finally, to that very point, security should always be done based on risk assessment. Security itself is way too complex to simply be a matter of checklisting. It's not simply enough to say firewall check, anti-DDoS check, access controls check. Rather, what is really required is a risk-based approach to security, which means that the measures are determined, prioritized, roadmapped based on their contribution to lowering risk. Risk assessments should be refreshed periodically, typically annually, and measures should be roadmapped, and also residual risks should be addressed, primarily through enhanced monitoring techniques. So if I may finish with this slide. So again, from a future-oriented perspective, because of course, in Bell Labs, we are always thinking of the future back. Ultimately, the goal is to leverage AI to marshal the complexity of the ever-evolving security space because of the evolution that I started with discussing, evolution not only in the threats dimension, but also technologies and indeed the compliance dimension. Ultimately, we are driving towards a security posture that is proactive, that is adaptive to that ever-evolving technology space, and ultimately AI-enabled and cognitive. So thank you for that, and I would be delighted to discuss any comments or questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sir Alan. Actually, we have questions over our live audience right now. For your reference, we've actually typed the questions over the chat box, the Zoom chat box. So one of the question was, can you suggest some of the better adapted cybersecurity frameworks?
So I'm a big fan of the NIST framework as an overarching, let's say, umbrella or facade, because the NIST framework does an excellent job of reducing cybersecurity to key categories: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and adding layers of detail under that, and then being an excellent framework for referencing a wide range of more detailed authoritative sources such as ISO, CIS, and others. And indeed, as mentioned, it is extendable, it's adaptive. So I think the NIST framework is an excellent overarching framework. I also think that the CIS controls do an excellent job of having pretty comprehensive prioritized coverage as well. So those are the two that I would highlight.
Okay. Another question. Are frameworks or proactive solutions developed by Bell Labs shared to be part of international standards?
Certainly Bell Labs is very, very active in standards, and security research is driving into all kinds of standards, including security standards. I think one immediate example is Nokia and Bell Labs chaired and were very, very active participants in driving the security measures for 5G. So to that extent, yes, Bell Labs is actively driving standards. In terms of security frameworks, if I recollect correctly, Bell Labs would have commented on draft frameworks such as the NIST framework. I'm not aware of any active participation. But in the consulting side of Bell Labs, one thing that we actively do and have done several times is to work with our clients to either design a framework specifically for the client or to adapt frameworks on their behalf. So that's an area where we have a lot of experience.
So, Press Reese, will you do the honor of reading the third question?
Yeah, so I think from Sir Ben Isra also, this question is I noticed that you do not have the 𝐸-MITRE attack framework. Can you comment on it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, actually it's there implicitly. If I may return to one slide. So again, yes, I'm a big fan of the work at MITRE, and I'm very interested in also they have done some good work specifically on 5G. So I was discussing this, which is one version of a structured threat modeling approach. This happens to be the approach that we use when we conduct risk assessments, but many of you will be familiar with versions of this. When we construct a threat modeling approach, we start, of course, with the assets, and then we discuss high-level business threats, such as service disruption, such as information disclosure. And then we reason about the concrete attacks that could be used to realize those high-level threats. And the example I gave was a very simple one, a denial of service attack, to realize the threat of service disruption. But this is where frameworks such as the MITRE framework are relevant. So when we reason about concrete attacks, we bring in external sources such as MITRE, which is all about the techniques that attackers may use, concrete attacks. But not only MITRE, we have our own knowledge base of attacks on various technologies also. And of course, there are other sources too. So absolutely, MITRE, I think, have done some excellent work. It continues to evolve. And it is fascinating also that they have produced MITRE FIGHT framework, which is specific to 5G in the telecoms domain.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Maybe we can get some questions from our Mr. Chair or BOD Alex. Yeah.
I think one very interesting aspect in our current technology is the 5G technology. And until today, I have not seen a comprehensive study as to how we can secure 5G end-to-end. And it's been considered as a game changer, both positive and negative, especially when you talk about attack surface, because 5G definitely widens the attack surface on the user end. And if we talk about IoTs in a 5G environment, IoTs are still not possible to secure until today because of low processing power, low memory, and you cannot deploy security controls, no? Or security countermeasures on the asset itself. So with Nokia, you briefly explained the securing 5G here, but what about on the asset level. Now it's easy, it's probably easier on the back end or on the infra side, but on the user end layer or level, how do we secure 5G by default?
Yes, a very excellent point. IoT, of course, does have that security challenge that you mentioned. It is very hard to bake in adequate security measures on IoT devices themselves, which essentially means that the only way to secure IoT comprehensively is in the network. If you can't do it at the device, you have to address it in the network that the devices are communicating over. 5G, I think, is a great example because, again, as you echoed the point, it itself is a novel evolving technology, extraordinarily complex, the supply chain, the ecosystem. 5G itself is challenging to secure and requires multiple stakeholders to secure in and of itself. The standards bodies address 5G security by design, but when the standards bodies defined 5G, many of the security measures that are baked into 5G are then optional to use. So an operator may deploy a 5G network and may select security measures to use or not to use. So it is possible to deploy a 5G network in a very secure configuration, or frankly, a very insecure configuration. It's critical that the operator makes very judicious choices about the security measures to deploy. It's very important also that the vendor, and Nokia, of course, is a vendor of 5G equipment. The vendor must have secure development practices. And supply chain assurance is critical there. There are global security assurance schemes, which are all about independent testing, security testing of 5G, and certification of the security of 5G devices, and increasingly virtual functions from vendors. 5G, though, can be a security enabler. One key feature of 5G is it enables, as I mentioned briefly in the talk, network slices. So one could envisage, for example, to your point, if a critical infrastructure vertical was making extensive use of IoT, so I'm not speaking, of course, of consumer IoT here. Let's think, for example, of a utility company that had a massive deployment of, say, or perhaps an Industry 4.0 company that massively deployed sensors in a digitized factory space. 5G can contribute to the security of those sensors, which may indeed, to your point, be relatively constrained in terms of their own native security measures. A secure network slice could be provided to secure the communication of those IoT devices. Then that communication could be monitored in the network to detect any possible compromise or nefarious use of those devices. So these would mitigate the risks that were residual because the devices themselves could not be fully secured. So 5G, again, in summary, it itself must be secured, but it also has a role to play in security of the applications that are using it in ways that just were not possible with prior generations such as 4 and 3G.
Very well explained, Alan.
Thank you.
The worry is attacks will be redirected to the user end, even more aggressive than how things are already happening. And imagine if you have a 5G bandwidth.
Yes.
Threat actors can use all the zombies. The irony is with IoT, you cannot deploy countermeasures, but threat actors can deploy bots or malwares, very small ones, that can launch distributed denial of service attack against other entities in a 5G environment where we are already talking about giga, no? GB, no longer MB when it comes to speed. So you mentioned and I agree that vendors should work hand in hand in order to release to the public secured IoTs, no, not insecured IoTs. Thank you, Alan. I think we have more questions, Arlie.
If I may just very briefly, just return to one point though, again, absolutely I agree with your point there. But again, to emphasize, when the device side is vulnerable, some of those vulnerabilities can be mitigated in the network through monitoring, through perhaps, to your point about DDoS, I just want to echo my previous point. Anti-DDoS itself is going to evolve in terms of sophistication and efficacy through the use of AI and ML. So one could envisage better anti-DDoS protections provided perhaps by service providers, possibly on an optional basis, possibly on a paid basis, but nonetheless, these are measures that could potentially be enabled in the network to protect the user side. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Alan. Let me just highlight this one question from Sir Patrick Sulit about increased risk due to supply chain attacks. So according to him, 5G infrastructure is complex and requires a substantial amount of third-party hardware and software. This increases the possibility of a security breach that may spread across the network, leading to malicious software and hardware being provided by untrusted sources. How does your organization manage this?
Absolutely. And it's a great point, and absolutely I agree with it, that the complexity of the ecosystem, the complex supply chain, the increased use of open source software, for example, all of these represent risks. So it is that, fascinating contradiction that on one hand, 5G is a great example of something that is at the same time more secure, but also potentially more vulnerable as well in other dimensions. The way our organization addresses it is, of course, through the secure development practices. So Nokia has secure software development practices, including measures such as training and awareness, secure coding guidelines, supply chain security for the software and services that our organization will use, and critically testing, extensive security testing. And I did earlier highlight the role that AI will play in supporting secure development and also supporting security testing. So that is critical. And again, to echo something else I mentioned earlier, there are now global security assurance schemes where vendors such as Nokia can contribute our products for independent testing. One great example is NESAS. It's a security assurance scheme from GSMA, which is a global body for mobile telecommunications. So that helps operators make judicious choices as to which vendors they're trusting, because the assurance schemes essentially give independent assessment of the secure development practices of the vendor, as well as independent security testing of the assets that the vendor is delivering to the market. But it's an ever-evolving space. It's an area of rapid evolution, and supply chain security globally is getting more and more attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alan. We have another question from our Facebook live audience from Sir Albert Remo. Your thoughts on how people can adapt or continuously develop knowledge and skills to handle and mitigate future threats and risk? Yeah, of course, the skill set, the skills gap and the resource gap in cybersecurity globally is really a challenge. And I think here there will be a role for AI. I think in acquiring security skills, I think certifications are very important. They give a structure, really. As security practitioners and professionals, most of us will pursue various certifications, and they can be useful in terms of giving an overall structure and a benchmark.
But really, security is such a rapidly evolving domain that certifications don't really keep up. And again, I see a role for AI here. I mean, I think even now, even with the rapid evolution we are seeing with AI, it's fascinating to see how something like ChatGPT, for example, can already augment the learning of professionals in all domains, but specifically in security. And I think that will only increase and improve. I think AI will have a strong role to play in skills development, but also skills augmentation going forward. So in our learning phases, we will increasingly, as professionals, I anticipate we will be increasingly using AI as mentor, AI as tutor, but also, you know, in our working phase, increasingly we will all be augmented by AI as a knowledge asset. And that will be true in security as with other domains as well. It's certainly already becoming true in the software development industry, and I think it will become very much more pervasive, including in security.
So since you mentioned about AI, Alan, I just have one question for you. So I love the insights that you give, that, you know, moving from a proactive security to a new model that is adaptive, right? Using AI and ML, and definitely, you know, there's a good side of AI helping us secure our forefronts, right? But do you think that because this could be used by the adversaries as well, right? Attacking us, definitely. So on my take, do you think the next battlefield on cyber will be AI, and how will we combat that in terms of adversary using AI as well to attack us?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is literally like an arms race, isn't it? It's literally like an arms race. And I guess it was always true in security that the battle can never be won. In a sense, nothing can ever be fully secured. In a sense, security is about finding the right balance of investment to mitigate the risk, to become less attractive of a target to the attacker. And indeed, to your point, exactly, you know, we will be defended by AIs from attacks by AIs. And the point is, it will be a constant battle to stay ahead of that curve. And one can never be absolutely secure whether we are speaking about AI measures or more traditional measures. So it's very much like an arms race. I think, again, the important thing is to have a roadmap, a future-oriented view, and to have a roadmap based on risk. I think a great example of that is, there was a brief mention in my talk of quantum computing, and the threat of quantum computing, perhaps augmented by AI, in terms of attacking cryptography. Now, of course, this is theoretical, but inevitable, let's say. It may be years, it may even be decades before it is practical, but ultimately, our current encryption schemes will potentially be compromised by quantum. But the point of being proactive is to address this today. What I would advocate is to have a roadmap today based on a risk assessment. So if we're talking about quantum, the way to approach it today would be to catalog your assets, your data assets in terms of criticality, and see which may potentially be subject to attack by quantum techniques in the future. Because if you have a data breach today, your attacker may not be able to crack your encryption today, but in future years, they may be able to break that encryption on the data that has already been exfiltrated. So it's important then, and there are measures that one can take proactively even today. Simply increasing the key strength of symmetric cryptography can be enough, but road mapping the adoption of quantum safe cryptography is important also. But that's the quantum example. A similar approach should be taken for AI as well. I think it's important for enterprises to assess what is their posture and what is their policy in terms of using AI, and you know, engaging also with with the ecosystem. including their providers of security systems as to how they may roadmap. Building an AI competency and internal techniques. And also automation of security, including through use of AI, is critical not only for protecting against attacks, including by AI, but it's also one way to address the cybersecurity skills gap that we briefly touched on. So I think automation of security, it's important for more rapid and effective protection and incident management, but also you want to augment your limited supply of skill sets with AI. And also it's a more attractive environment to attract new talent as well, I suggest. So I think future-looking organizations should be thinking early about how to mitigate risks with AI, but also how to adopt it and exploit it.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you.
Okay, is it okay? There are two more questions coming from our live audience about vulnerabilities in improperly deployed 5G equipment and networks. So improperly deployed, configured, or managed 5G equipment and networks may be vulnerable to disruption and manipulation. Susceptibility of the 5G supply chain could increase the vulnerabilities of network asset compromise and affect data confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So what is your take on this?
Absolutely. So it is absolutely critical that the operator makes very judicious choices of the 5G security measures to adopt, but also working with a vendor to, configure the network to be secure. Hardening guidelines from vendors are critical. Also, operation of the network must be secure, and that's where concepts such as zero trust should be brought to bear. 5G network should ideally be deployed with very strong zoning and segmentation and very tight zero trust based access control for administrators. And to your point about configuration, configuration errors can introduce security vulnerabilities. Configuration changes can also be indicative of malicious acts, because one thing that an attacker may do is maliciously, nefariously alter configuration. So configuration auditing is a key approach to mitigate that. And possibly that could also be based on AI also. And by the way, with apologies, I will have to leave for another engagement shortly. So maybe if I may take one more question and then.
Yeah, I think we've hold you long enough already, Alan, and you have provided us a very vast of information about especially about 5G, and we don't want to keep you from your other meetings. So
Not at all.
Yeah, maybe Arlene, we should wrap this up with Mr. Alan. No?
Yes.
I mean, cybersecurity, it will, even for one day, we won't be able to cover everything.
Definitely, sir.
Okay, well, I do want to thank you for the opportunity and fascinating discussion. It was my great pleasure to speak to you today. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much, Alan. On behalf of 𝐓𝐫𝐞𝐳 community, we are highly appreciative with your time and sharing your knowledge for 1 hour, more than an hour, I believe. And we hope to be able to engage with you again in the future. Maybe in one of the face-to-face events of 𝐓𝐫𝐞𝐳. We'll get in touch with Nokia Philippines.
Great. And of course, anybody who wishes to connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out over email, I'd appreciate that also. And thank you again, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. You are excused.
So very informative.
Alright. Mabigat ang discussion natin, mga 𝐓𝐫𝐞𝐳. Si Albert, nandiyan pala si Albert Remo. Si Ben Isra, nandiyan din. Oh,
Yes,
Mr. Jimbo.
Yeah.
Mr. Jimbo, naalala mo pa ba yung ang galing-galing ni 𝐓𝐫𝐞𝐳 natin? Sigurado ako lasing ka na nun eh. Okay. So,
Yes, Mr. Chair.
another Friday, another cases done. We will see you again next Friday. Mag-ingat kayo sa pagmamaneho at medyo maulan or sa maraming areas baha yata, no? Hanggang bukas pa yata yung bagyo. Sana naman wala nang ulan at sana lahat kayo ay safe and sound. So another weekend. Ito na, sentensyahan na natin to. Jimbo, ano mo yung ano natin ha, yung ginawa natin nung padala mo sa Pix Pro. So, another weekend, mga ka-Pix Pro, na-miss namin itong every Friday natin na at least naka-3 Friday na ba ako? Sunod-sunod.
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect attendance.
Okay.
Attendance
So, sabi nga nila, happy weekend. Pero sa cybersecurity, happy lang. Walang weekend.
Have a great, safe weekend, everyone.
Happy dinner, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.